Today on the 1012 podcast, I am joined by Mr. StatsOWar himself, Parker Fleming. We are going to try to get to 16 questions for the Big 12 for the upcoming season. Yes, one question for every team. We don't quite get there, but we do get to just about everyone. We do at least say something, I think, about every single team in the Big 12. Good conversations about Baylor, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, why coaching matters so much in the Big 12, West Virginia, why he's a little bit higher on them than I am. Lots to get to. Lots to get to with Parker. Always a good time. I'd like to have more thoughts on a lot of things going on in college athletics right now. There is a lot. There's a lot to talk about with the Big 12. But I was a little bit preoccupied as of late with the Oklahoma City Thunder and with softball transfer portal action. So, look, this is episode 598. We've got 599. It'll drop on Monday. And then we'll have a little bit of break until episode 600. And then I'll do my best to have a deep dive on football and everything that's going on. We will have rankings week in July. So, but that'll be essentially episodes 601 through 605. So, with all that said, Parker Fleming, let's get to it.
USAA knows dynamic duos can save the day, like superheroes and sidekicks or auto and home insurance. With USAA, you can bundle your auto and home and save up to 10%. Learn more and get a quote at usaa.com/bundle. Restrictions apply.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
Welcome to the 1012, the podcast that covers all 16 teams in the Big 12 Conference. We're the flagship show, the 1012 Network. Find every show on the network at 1012network.com. And of course, we are partners with Sports Social, Europe's biggest sports podcast network. I'm your host, Phillip. Thank you for joining us for another one of our pre-recorded summer episodes. I wanted to take the month of June off, but I felt bad leaving just nothing out there. And so the opportunity to record with some of my favorite guests had presented itself, and I said, let's do this. And so if you're watching the video version of that, that is why I'm currently wearing my Swingin' Pistol Pete hat, because the Cowboys just won the NCAA Men's Golf Championships. That gives you a time frame idea of when this was actually recorded. And joining me today, as I mentioned, favorite guests, the fact that his schedule freed up, he's no longer got Split Zone Duo and every other amazing, incredible national college football podcast to discuss. He can just come on our little old show and talk Big 12. He is, of course, StatsOWar, Parker Fleming himself. Parker, welcome back, bud.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Glad I could successfully bully you into doing some pre-recorded stuff for the summer, and excited to kind of be back on the podcast circuit and get to talk to people. I was thinking about this before I hopped on. We've known each other now since 2019?
Yeah.
I mean, crazy, but it's wild going way back and seeing, honestly, not to embarrass you, like what 1012 has become and the effort and work you've put in to create a network and acquire, good people and set them up for success and create some really cool stuff, man. It's awesome to see kind of where this has come to in this moment, and excited to be back on.
I appreciate that. I would say I've been very lucky with the people that I've had the opportunity to have on here, be it co-hosts, guests, podcast hosts that are part of the network like that. I have been very lucky and very blessed to be able to create the relationships with the caliber and quality of people that I have through this. And it's super fun and I love it. Dude, I remember when you were just the guy Melissa mentioned I should talk to over there at StatsOWar. And now, I'm having conversations with you about whether or not you might go work for a major league sports team. So, we've all come a long way. I am always impressed by you, and it's always a fun time when we get to have you on the show. I feel like I need to start calling you the best beard in the business. Does that seem appropriate? I mean, for those who
I
are
mean,
not watching on YouTube or haven't seen Parker's beard in a while, it's magnificent.
About 2 months ago, I cut legitimately 4 inches off of it. It was here, and we're trimmed up a little bit. So
Got to maintain. Got to maintain. All right. So we're just talking about Big 12. I think the concept for this episode was just kind of like questions about the conference. We'll try and get to. I think I'm going to title this one 16 Big 12 questions, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. I might change the title depending on how many questions we actually answer. Oh man, this Big 12 this year. It's without having said I've dived in deep into every single roster and every single team, and I've got thoughts on everyone. I wonder the longer we've done this, that how do we, I'm curious from your standpoint, it's this conference being so hard to predict because it is a conference that is all about development cycles, hitting on guys, and you cannot predict externally, realistically, who's going to develop where. Now, the coaches have an idea of that, and the coaches have ideas of that in practice that they're going to be wrong about. There's coaches who have an idea about that and tell us about those players, and they're, BSing us because they're giving us the usual coach speak. And so it's so hard, unless you are there, to really truly evaluate where rosters are as you head into a season. And as we know, they develop throughout the season as well. But we look at Arizona State last year. Talking to Shahan, we were like, they were a year ahead of schedule. We could argue they were like 2 years ahead of schedule to where they came from the year before to that. And we've seen enough of we all thought Baylor was the next big thing after they won the Big 12 title in 2021, and then it kind of teetered off, which feels very Big 12. I don't expect that from Arizona State this year, but nothing shocks me in the Big 12 anymore. I mean, even Mike Gundy not going winless in conference play, something we'd never actually seen him do his entire time at Oklahoma State. What are things you think we should look for when trying to make educated guesses about the Big 12 conference throughout the summer as we head into the season?
Yeah, I mean, you make a great point about it being such a developmental league, and how often have we seen one team, win, compete nationally, and then kind of peter out the next year. Even in the Oklahoma years, there was kind of a rotating cast of who was playing second fiddle to Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship, and it was all about the development cycles, and they're very hard to predict. I mean, it's not like the preseason poll is, a looking into the future. I know people who vote. I've voted in the past on it. Like it's not some kind of divination exercise, but it's not total nonsense. And Arizona State being picked last and being where they were, even BYU was picked a little bit lower, and for them to hit the right bounces, just goes to speak how close the margins are, how thin the margins are, and how much, getting the right team at the right time, having your guys hit their ceiling at the right time and gel together is so important. I think it actually makes coaches a little more valuable in the sense of team orchestration, install, development throughout the season, as opposed to just talent acquisition, which is kind of interesting. And the Big 12 is kind of niche. The coaching and styles matter a whole lot, just because what you can do with the players is almost as important as the caliber of player that you can bring into the Big 12. I think that's really reflected by Circa gave their win totals, and not to make everything about betting, not like giving advice or anything, just saying this is a state of the market and they're pretty sharp. Arizona State and Kansas State and Texas Tech are tied at the top with 8.5 as their win total. So that's not saying none of these teams are going to be good. That's literally like a book that is taking action and has stake in the game and is going to lose money if they're wrong, saying, we're not sure. We just don't know who's going to break out and be kind of that top level team. Very, very flat. I think the lowest is Oklahoma State and West Virginia, both with 5. So a 3.5 win spread from top to bottom of the conference. That's just absurd in terms of how close the margins are here. I think what you want to look for is a couple of things. You want to look for continuity at the coordinator position. Guys that have been there year over year. You want to look at continuity in the quarterback, obviously, and guys that are developing. I think we'll talk about one of those in a minute with Baylor Sawyer Robertson, but the idea of, can they replicate what was successful in the past? Is there another step for him to take? I think that's something we saw last year with like Garrett Green, where he was really fun, did all this kind of crazy scramble stuff, looked like an Appalachian version of Max Duggan at times. But we knew, like, okay, if they can contain him in the run game, there's not a lot of pass juice. And that's exactly what happened to West Virginia last year. And there just wasn't another step to take. So that's important there. I think we're switching, Phillip, kind of one of my old heuristics, which was defensive continuity, to defensive continuity plus did you address your weaknesses in the portal? Because I think in modern college football, you just can't wait around for a guy to become a guy. You've got to bring in, somebody as well to hit those key positions of edge rusher, your boundary corner, an off-ball linebacker to really help with the run stuffing. Some of these teams running the 3 down. We've seen a lot of nose tackle movement, trying to find a big body in the middle as well. So those are kind of my little heuristics of, is this team going to hit their development cycle? I also think you got to look at last year, just because the variance is so high, that like a team who won a lot of close games last year and got all the bounces is probably not going to get those again this year.
No, the close game thing, like I've run the numbers, like the teams who win 1-score games are the teams who are going to find themselves in Arlington more often than not, because it's just in the Big 12, you're not, like, especially since Oklahoma took their dip. Like, you just don't see anybody running through the conference, like, blowing teams out. It's just not a reality. You're going to have to win.
Well, and the reality is no one's going to have the overwhelming talent advantage that Oklahoma and Texas did. Even TCU, who was consistently third under Gary Patterson and kind of that talent, was still a gulf away from those top two and still not super far ahead from the other one. So it is like just shrinking the range of distribution of talent, even if you have a good year and bring in a lot of people.
I think we have a hard time with the talent aspect of, like, well, TCU, I mean, you say they're the only one who's top 20 and everybody else is like sub 30. That's a huge gap. No, because the difference when it comes to this kind of stuff is not the difference between 1 and 10 could be equal to the distance between 10 and 90. Just because it's in an incremental order, that's not how you can always view things. It's why we talk about, we've talked on some of the other episodes we've recorded for the summer, tiering. Like, tiers make so much more sense, especially in a conference for the Big 12, than straight ranking. It's too hard to straight rank in this conference because you could have 4 teams tied at second and another 3 teams tied at 11th. Like, we had 4 teams tied essentially for first at the end of last season. Does that mean that order is how much better one team is than the other? No, that's just that there's a tiering system. I think that is a better way to evaluate the Big 12, as volatile and as close as it is, than a straight ranking. And so it's just, you have to look at things through that lens more than 1 to 2 is equal to 2 to 3 is equal to 3 to 4 is equal to 4 to 5 as far as a gap situation.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to think it's nonlinear as you go, and it kind of gets shorter between those. But yeah, so the talent acquisition is interesting. Looking at 2025 recruiting rankings, TCU's top at 230. And 9 teams are above 200. So that's, volume matters a lot there in terms of what they are. Like TCU, the top average team in the Big 12 is, I clicked 247 and it refreshed the entire thing to the entire conference. I just totally killed my point there. But the top is, TCU's like 87, Colorado's 89. But even the bottom, Houston, it's an 86 average recruit coming in. Iowa State at 86.5, UCF 87, Kansas 86. So there's a lot of volume effects even in those different recruiting rankings that just go to show, like, oh, the actual 1 to 16 is not really that informative.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, agreed. You made a comment about coaching, and I coaching matters everywhere. It is part of it, like. At this point, NIL, like talent, coaching does matter. You can have all the talent in the world. We've seen this across college football for years. If you don't have the coaching, it doesn't matter. And so I look at the Big 12, and I think when you have a conference where everything is as close as it is, unless you have rosters with massive talent disparities, like Kansas used to be, right? You could have put Nick Saban at Kansas. If they had that roster, he's still not going to win a national championship with it. Like, I don't care how good Nick Saban is. But I think in the Big 12,
most of the gains Nick Saban would have brought to Kansas would be in roster composition, not X's and O's on the field. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But like, coaching matters so much. And I think the perfect example to me, and I differed with a couple of people I've talked to about this, of like, I actually like Cincinnati's roster. I think Cincinnati has a good roster. I really like Brendan Sorsby. I think he is a good quarterback. I think there's some talent on that defense. I think this is a situation where and I want to. I can't believe I'm going to do this. I'm going to give credit to Satterfield for rebuilding a roster that, when Fickle left, was not good. It was talent deficient, and I think they have put together a good roster. But from a coaching standpoint, I think if you put a Chris Kleiman, and let's talk talent level from a coaching standpoint more than scheme specific from a coaching standpoint. A Chris Kleiman like coach from a how good we think he is. At a Cincinnati, they make a bowl game last year. Like that is a team that is performing far better than they have the first 2 years, especially last year. I just don't have high expectations for Satterfield, and it's where I look at the Big 12. And I think we can group Cincinnati this way. I'm going to put UCF with their rehire. I'm going to put Arizona with Brent Brennan, and I'm going to kind of lump these teams together and go, I think if you are not willing to make a smart, maybe out of the box hire, as opposed to the comfortable and safe hire in the Big 12 conference, you are not going to find success. Now, that doesn't mean that the young up-and-coming guy is going to win. It doesn't mean that the unique and creative hire is going to work out, but going with the safe route in the Big 12 conference, I think, is going to lead you to failure.
I think in some ways that's true, in the sense of like, you don't want to become the American, which sort of kind of became like coaches who didn't have jobs needed a job and posted up somewhere, and there's varying returns to that. And you don't want to kind of become that holding spot for cast aside former hires, right? Like you definitely want some innovation in that. I think I'd push back on Cincinnati a little bit, because I agree. Like I had my reservations about Satterfield. Like he's had the success he's had, and I don't know that I love that hire when it happened, but I'd actually give credit to Zach Grant, the GM, and Jack Griffith, who's a great recruiter over there. They've done some innovative stuff with, they've got some lower level offensive linemen coming in to add some depth and competition as well. And kind of seem to have outsourced some of that, not outsourced, but separated responsibility in a really interesting way for roster building versus coaching. And I think that only helps, letting you innovate, saying, hey, the roster guys are going to deal with the roster and the coach is going to assemble in the best way possible. It's not entirely siloed overall, but I agree. It's interesting, because I think for all three of those, I can make a case. I just did for Cincinnati. For Arizona, Brent Brennan is kind of like, you look at his San Jose State teams, and they were really good at offense one year and really bad at defense one year. And then they were really good at defense, but they were really bad at offense. And like, clearly he could recruit talent. It's just hard to balance that year over year, especially with the limited resources. And so the vision in Arizona is like, he's an evaluator. He knows how to win in multiple ways. Can he assemble both sides of the ball at the same time and kind of peak and get you down that positive development cycle in the Big 12? I think that's the vision there. And then I don't think there's anyone in America who doubts that Scott Frost can't coach ball. Like, I think a lot of coaches would have struggled with the similar media circus, and maybe he encouraged some of it. Like, there were probably mistakes made of Scott Frost at Nebraska. Like his quote about climbing the ladder of success, no one tells you to stop when you're happy. Like that was profound. And I think he's done a lot of reflection, and UCF is a place that he could love and be invested in. And so that's kind of exciting as well. But I agree. I think there are, all three of those are kind of project iffy teams, in the sense of a lot has to go right for them to compete for the title this year, the Big 12 title specifically. And, they're never going to be the best talent acquiring teams. They're the ones that, are going to benefit most from innovating and taking risks, calculated risks, but taking risks and trying to strategize a little bit more to get some more marginal value where other people aren't finding it.
All right. I love it. Some of Arizona is not, I think, on Brent Brennan, other than the fact that you shouldn't have taken a job where they expected you to come in and be somebody else than you were. And
yeah, it's hard. Yeah. It's hard. It is.
Yeah.
It also stinks that Arizona State, like, that's completely out of control, but like Arizona State peaking right now too is just, it just makes it hard, man. It's a dynamic system. It depends on a lot of things outside your control, and that objectively sucks for Brent Brennan.
Arizona reaching the height they did and then nosediving the same season that Arizona State goes from worst to first is crushing. That's rough. And congratulations, welcome to the Big 12. I've got Arizona State fans who are like, well, if Arizona State can stay here at the top of this conference, and I'm like, they could. There's one team in this conference I trust to be consistent and always win a minimum of 8 games, and that's Kansas State, because that's just what Chris Kleiman and Kansas State does. Now, they've got to figure out how to hit the highs from a consistency standpoint, where it's not just 8-9 wins, it's 10 or 11. But The only program I feel comfortable with at this point from a consistency standpoint is Kansas State. Even Iowa State, and Iowa State fans are going to get mad, but like you still had weird down years for Campbell in the middle of where you are and what you were with Brock Purdy. And oh, by the way, they've got a ton of defense in place this year, and you're two NFL
really great
wide receivers. And so we'll see how that rebuild goes there. I just like Kansas State to me is the example of this is the team that's going to be consistent. I'm curious from your standpoint from Kansas State, like they're going to win. I've just penciled them in for 8 games. That the Vegas number has them at 8.5, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll just take the over on that because it feels like probably a relatively good bet to assume that Kansas State probably wins 9 games. Maybe they win 10 or 11. I think a lot of it's going to come down to, does Avery Johnson start to look like the guy everyone thought he might be last year and take that big step forward? And this is that development question. I think is going to be the theme for this podcast. That development is for Kansas State. To me, it's the development of Avery Johnson. And with what they have lost on defense, I trust them to replace things, but how far along is that development there in Manhattan for this season?
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big question for me. And like, it's not, you don't want to penalize a guy for staying, and he's certainly getting taken care of. But like, Avery Johnson wasn't really somebody who was on the radar of getting poached for transfer portal. And you wonder if that's not a signal about quality in some ways. I think Kansas State very happy to have him. And I don't think that, if there was a hypothetical world where they could have kept Will Howard, it would have really done much different. Like, their receivers are still not Jeremiah Smith and those guys. So like I don't think that was Will Howard was necessarily a driving force behind that there. Kansas State did do well on offense. I mean, I had them at 15th at opponent adjusted EPA per play last year. Like that, they put together a better offense than they had repute, but the run game was really strong, and Avery didn't, with increased volume, and obviously only had like 2 or 3 games in 2023, didn't complete a lot of his passes, only 58.1%, 28 drops. And that's not all his fault. And that's not his fault at all, but there just wasn't a connection. It feels like he got graded on this curve of, we expect you to take over for a veteran and be great. And he didn't get as much credit for what they did there. I think the defense overall, or the offense overall, was, relatively solid. He had a couple big games. West Virginia put up some big numbers. Houston against a good defense. Arizona State 255 yards, and so I think there's opportunities for the volume there. But Kansas State is going to replicate this formula of hard-nosed, tough players who play consistent climb in football. They have one of the strongest senses of identity in the nation. I think the offensive coordinator change matters a whole lot, and we saw some of that on the field last year. I also think, that if there's a world where they can get out of their own way and kind of give Avery Johnson the leash to become that guy, he certainly has tools to be a true Big 12 dual threat quarterback that we've seen and even come to know and love from Kansas State specifically. That's my biggest question for them. I think in terms of what they didn't bring in a lot of transfers, like they knew they weren't going to do that. Their recruiting rankings, they're not, they're second in the conference there. They brought in a bulk of 3 stars and only two stars. They really prioritize that depth in those guys. They're not chasing stars necessarily, and they have a little bit of a different identification process. But if they're going to take the step and kind of move out of frustrating non-contender to contender, it's going to be because Avery Johnson can kind of elevate this offense in a way that helps the defense as well. You think back, the one that really sticks on me there, and I think we had talked about it, just like the BYU game where, BYU was a good team last year and they outplayed their fundamental metrics. Like that just objectively happened. That's great. But like the Kansas State game, you just saw Kansas State was a better team and just crumbled. And like BYU beat them and they got credit for that, but looking at that, Johnson in those last I don't know, 4 minutes of the half, just completely unwound, made some mistakes, and they got in a hole they couldn't come back with, especially against BYU style there. And you think that can't happen. You've got to take away those lower bound of plays. You've got to shift that distribution up. I don't necessarily need to see more explosives from Avery Johnson. Would love them. I don't need to see more top end plays. I need to see fewer negative plays. That bodes well for quarterback development because you think that's what comes with experience, right? And that's what comes with starting, is knowing you don't have to force a play. But that's kind of the big looming question for Kansas State. I think they've got guys around and again, are going to be consistent up through the trenches, which is going to give them a big advantage in the Big 12. And Kleiman is really even-handed in game management and kind of what he wants to do. If Johnson can just play that consistent level of football, keep the explosive plays and kind of mitigate those unforced errors, that's the step in development I'm looking for him this year.
Yeah, Kansas State on their fourth offensive coordinator in 5 years. You had 2 years of Klein before he went for A&M. You had Connor Riley last year. He's with the Dallas Cowboys. Now you've got Matt Wells. So that consistency, like, it's hard when you have to keep changing. And I understand that it's, people who are quote unquote there understand you and know your system, but it's still change. Like it's still change. And you'd like to see some consistency there for Kansas State and some consistency just for Avery Johnson's development. You're having a new voice for him every single year. Like that matters in development. That impacts development. Sometimes it can be a positive impact because this new voice might be the one that clicks and helps him really figure himself out. It might not. It may stunt the growth. So it's tough for Kansas State because you expect consistency. It's just really odd to see such inconsistency from the fact that they haven't changed OC so many times over the last 5 seasons. And I think that the impact is, you can see it. I think it's started to wear. And so hopefully Matt Wells can stay there for a little while. Whether it's successful or not, like just consistency might help. We kind of breezed over Arizona State. I do want to talk about them. I think they're going to be talked about as the favorite to some extent. I think most people, even national media, have caught on to it's the chaos conference. You can't just pick last year's champ to repeat anymore. Like that's not how this conference works. It doesn't happen. We don't get repeat champions since Oklahoma's 4-year run, let alone repeat teams in the conference championship game. But I can't imagine an Arizona State massive drop off. I'm having a hard time with everything they bring back, even without Cam Scadaboo, seeing some massive drop off for this team. That doesn't mean they'll be back in Arlington. We could have another 3-4-way split at the top and they lose on tiebreakers. But you look at this Arizona State team and you say, okay, massive step forward last season. No one could have seen that kind of a jump. Like, again, year ahead of schedule, 2 years ahead of schedule, how you want to view that. How do we go into this season? Like, what is it? What would you want to see from Arizona State this year that would make you go, okay, we may have something here that we're not used to seeing in the Big 12 as a program that can start to build some sense of consistency in who and what they are and success?
Yeah, I mean, Sam Leavitt is getting all sorts of accolades and a really good football player. I wonder if we're getting cart in front of the horse there a little bit, just because I think the way that they succeeded last year was really Scadabo did a lot with an offensive line that wasn't great. I mean, there's so many plays. You go back and watch Scadabo's film. There's so many plays where you think, oh, shoot, there's a missed block. He's going to get cooked. And Scadabo just hits a guy and falls 5 yards forward. Like, it is truly impressive, what he was able to do with not a lot of support. And the freedom that gave their offense. I mean, he had 40 targets last year. Like, he was involved in the passing game. It was a really great check down option for Sam Leavitt, really great short game as well, to just get that guy in the open field and let him cook. And I think, rising tide lifts all boats there and makes things easier. So how their offense will function without that kind of anchor point, that cornerstone, is really interesting. If the media is right and Leavitt's going to take this big step forward and be, potentially the top quarterback in college football, he's going to play differently than he did last year. He's not going to check down as much to Scadabo because he's not there. I think it's interesting because I do think there is some discounting on the context of that. Like Jordan Tyson, great wide receiver coming back, had almost 40% of their targets last year. So between him and Scadabo, you're at 65, 70% of targets. And I think those two together are really, really valuable as kind of like a dual pair. And it's entirely plausible this year that you can just bottle Tyson up and force Levitt to go elsewhere, and they're really struggling. I think there's opportunities. Didn't they brought in the Army transfer?
Yes, I was
Udo?
going to ask you how much you've seen of Kanye Udo.
Yeah, as someone who supports the troops, watched a good bit of their scheme. Interesting to see. I get the sense he's not as much an open field runner as Cam Scatabo, but that's probably true for most running backs in college football. So can't really hold that against him there. But he's sustained volume and shown to be reliable, and I think comes with some things Arizona State will value in terms of ball discipline and physicality that will translate from Army really, really nicely, but certainly not going to take over and put up a Scatabo like season there. So I think there's a lot of moving pieces with Arizona. I think exactly as you alluded to, there's a very wide path for them to be a very good football team that's just not at the top of the conference again. Right. Even going back and kind of looking at their schedule and kind of how things broke, like, They were very fun at the beginning against Mississippi State, and that was kind of when they were first on my radar of like, oh, something might be happening here, because I didn't expect that to go like it did. But you look at kind of how the schedule broke and went down, like a great performance against Iowa State there at the end, and the BYU game, kind of they played BYU's game and came on top. But you look at the stretch, like the loss against Cincinnati, a loss against Texas Tech, those are tough, especially with the quality of competition of your wins, where you're like, oh, those are two teams that kind of defensively were able to mess with you a little bit and kind of get you off schedule and then take advantage of your mistakes. I can see that being more of the recipe to beat Arizona State this year, is saying, hey, we're going to make Levitt have to be an NFL caliber quarterback to beat us, and we're going to take away his number one option. And there, that's very real possibility that they stall and struggle in that.
Yeah. I'll be interested to see. They brought in some transfer wide receivers if they are able to benefit them. Alton McCaskill is on his third Big 12 team at Arizona State now, from Houston to Colorado to Arizona State. So we'll see how that goes as well.
And he's more of like an APB than he is a wide receiver, if I recall correctly, too. So, yeah, it's interesting to see the workload he gets.
Yeah. You mentioned Baylor. Might as well. I am... As I keep going through things and I look at champion, we've had our good friend Chase A. Kitty on to talk about betting and talk about early win totals. I am buying more and more into Baylor as my dark horse team, and I to the point that I don't even know that I want to. If I'm going to do a preseason poll for Big 12 Media Days, that I'm even going to consider them a dark horse and not just. I like the way Baylor ended last season, and they have questions. They have questions about the defense, specifically the secondary that was not great last year, and have they done enough to address that issue? I really like Baylor as there is something there, and I can see that they have made changes in the way they've run things there. From an NIL standpoint, from a transfer portal standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint, to where I think they're smart enough to have figured out their weaknesses, because the strengths they have that are harder to replace are still there, that they can be a team that makes the big jump this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think that's there. Like Sawyer Robinson, best QBR in the Big 12 last year, wasn't the case that they they weren't that at the beginning and kind of found something that clicked. Our friend Keegan Renault was, text me every Sunday morning about Baylor's offensive improvement week over week and how Spavital was doing a great job and how they built there. A couple things that they did that really work well. Some good play action RPO concepts to really set Sawyer up to make easy throws. And that's not to say that he's not good for making easy throws, but saying like they helped him, and that's great. They're also plus about 7 percentage points on plays with motion versus plays without motion in terms of success rate. And so that is really a good indicator that they are able to manipulate matchups and find leverage and kind of move those guys. That certainly did feel like they were doing more of a not like a flash in the pan, hey, not we're in a hot streak, but hey, we fundamentally changed something that we're going to do. And because of that, we're going to be able to continue to exploit that and continue to build on that. That's something I admired, Aranda's innovative mind. I think his willingness to try things, I think, is really, really a desirable quality as a coach. They're 9th in returning production on offense in the nation. And they're 25th on defense. So I think their defensive problem has been, Jalen Petries don't grow on trees. Like they Dylan Doyles aren't just lying around, right? Like, and that's hard to find those guys that were such linchpins of your defense, but they do return a good amount. And that offense having so much continuity and just a bunch of, fast skill players with Spavital an entire offseason to say, okay, I know what worked last year and what didn't. Let's cook and let's build this. I think they're really, really interesting. They should be towards the top of presumptive favorites. Like if you're drawing a circle around 6 Big 12 teams, I think could win the conference. I think you have to include them, and they're not sixth. And so that's really interesting, but it is always in the Big 12, like, it's always a little bit of a concern when something different happens last year and you think, okay, just because a thing is going strong need not mean it goes strong forever, right? Especially in the Big 12. And so that's my concern is, can they sustain that kind of breakout? I do believe that they should be. I think Sawyer Robinson is perhaps a little bit underrated at this point, just because people watch the Big 12 know he's good, but nationally, I don't believe he's receiving the requisite attention.
Oh, Baylor. You go to the bowl game and lose the bowl game. They weren't the talking point of the Big 12 last year. Yep. It was BYU, it was Arizona State, it was the fact that all these teams are new, it was what's happened to Oklahoma State and Utah. It's all these other things, and Baylor flew under the radar the entire season. And look, Sawyer Robinson wasn't even the guy who was supposed to be the starting quarterback for Baylor. That wasn't the talking point. It was the Toledo transfer. And it feels like Sawyer Robertson's been on that roster forever, and they finally figured out that he's the best quarterback they had that fits what they want to do. And, it happens. It happens at schools all the time. Like you have a guy and you're like, well, we have this guy, but this guy who's already here, who's just been hanging out, is the right fit for us. And now that we figured that out, and I think that's such a big thing of like, sometimes it's hard to just figure out. It seems so obvious, right? When we're sitting here watching games on Saturday with no other information, being like, well, how come you hadn't been playing him? Why didn't you guys see this from him? Because guy at practice versus guy in game isn't always the same guy. Like that's not how it works. And so I think it's the thing that sells me on Baylor so much is the fact that they finally found their quarterback. And I feel like that's been such a struggle for them for the last few seasons that, the defense isn't obvious. Like, congrats on finding a bunch of NFL guys that you just happen to have on the roster. But hey, you happen to have this quarterback on the roster too. And I'm glad they finally figured it out. They've done a lot in the portal as far as wide receivers, bringing in guys from Bama and Texas State and Colorado State. They brought in quite a few defensive backs as well as far as transfers go. And so it does feel like they've tried to elevate the athleticism and the talent of the roster, both offense and defense. And again, if the secondary is good this year, because it wasn't that's been the thing to exploit for Baylor the last few years is their secondary. If they have a good secondary, to me, that's going to tell us the truth of whether Baylor is going to another bowl game or playing in Arlington this year. Does the secondary actually look like they've fixed that problem?
Yeah, absolutely. And as for the quarterback thing, I'll just point out too, I had that one pegged as odd. Daquan Fenn did not have a lot of passing volume, and you thought a pairing with Jake Spavital, like this seems a little weird. So I think he was injured to start camp as well. And like, that's fortuitous for Baylor that they got this idea of, okay, we've got to make it run with Robertson. The one thing, if I'm going to be negative about Baylor, which I've never known to be in my entire history of being a person, the schedule is extremely front loaded.
Oh man.
Auburn, SMU, Arizona State, Kansas State in their first, 6 games?
Yeah.
3-3 is good there. And so they like, it's just hard that they get that bulk, but then they go TCU, Cincinnati, UCF by Utah, Arizona, Houston by. Like, we might be in another situation where Baylor stumbles out of the gate and then it looks like they get it together just because the second half competition is so much worse. And so I think that's the temptation we all have to avoid of like, oh, what's going on? Baylor's figuring that out halfway through. I think we have to say, no, if they don't win the games at the beginning of their schedule, they didn't figure it out. And then they just benefited there. So like, we could see a weirdly disappointing 9-3 season from Baylor. And like, just because, if they had figured it out, they would have been national competition, but instead they went, 2-4 or 3-3 against their first couple. And then, 1 out against the Big 12 there. So that's an interesting schedule breakdown that I think is a little bit of an oddity here for Baylor. That's the only thing that I would be negative about is like, for most teams, you want to reserve judgment until you see a couple games. For Baylor this season, dude, if they're not +1 in those first 6 games, it's going to be hard to believe that they really have any juice.
The other thing I'll say for the schedule that's interesting, let me just read it this way. Texas, 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 Oklahoma, Texas, Texas, Ohio, Texas, Texas, Arizona, Texas. They leave the state of Texas 3 times all season.
It's not bad.
We can talk about the caliber of the opponent, but I think location still matters to some extent. And the fact that one of your 3 trips outside of the state is to Stillwater, Oklahoma. And that's not a shot at Stillwater, but like it's not like it's that far.
Yeah, and they've played there every year for the last, whatever. So like it's familiar. Yeah, I mean that's very favorable. That's a good point as well.
And your other 2 are Cincinnati, who knows, and Arizona, who and you don't leave the state of Texas until the end of September, and then you don't leave the state of Texas again until the end of October. And so
that sets up like Cincinnati as a real trap game. Like if they're 5-1, beat TCU, 6-1, they're probably top 15 at that point. And then they leave the state for the first time. October in Cincinnati gets a little rainy, maybe a little chilly. That feels like a great trap opportunity there.
Yes, I like that. I like that one. Okay. Let's jump to Oklahoma State. We haven't touched on them at all yet.
Hey, it's Paris. You know I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and Auto Camp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
Mike Gundy used the I'm going to replace everybody because it's everyone else's fault but mine card. Now, typically you get one of those in your career. Gundy's had the level of success for the amount of time that he may get more than 1 year now that he's done that specifically. But I mean,
and he paid for that in blood, right? Like he made concessions and had to deal with the boosters and the board and everything, and kind of came to an understanding that looked a little rocky there. But this does feel like maybe for the first time in a decade for Gundy that it's like, okay, man, you gotta still prove that you're Mike Gundy or we're going to have to do something here.
Look, it pays to be nice. Rubbing a lot of people the wrong way for
the
things
corollary
off
that
of
is hilarious. The unspoken Mike Gundy corollary there is hilarious.
Rubbing people the wrong way off the field will come back to bite you when the on the field is not good. And so you look at the worst season of his tenure last year. Every single coach is gone. Coordinators, position coaches, they're all gone. Surely there's some analysts that are still there and some, grad assistants, cool, whatever. Somehow not the most, the least amount of returning production in the Big 12. That award goes to UCF, but still like not a lot. We have so easily relied on like, they'll be fine. It's Mike Gundy. And then last year happened. And last year being just, a catastrophic, like complete fall apart. I think it's the least confident I've been in Oklahoma State, not from like, they're going to figure it out, I have no idea what to expect. Like I don't. I think some of the position coach hires are really, really good and interesting and creative. I think the coordinator hires were coordinator hires. I do like again shouting the front office personnel. Like I do like Kenyatta Wright and his liberty to kind of build the roster, and I think that's something that Gundy is kind of one of those old school coaches where like, this is my program, I'm going to do everything. And I do think he made a real admission like this offseason going forward, like, okay, I need help in this, not because I can't do it, but because I can't do it alone. I can't do everything.
And so him empowering, I can't do everything. And so him empowering people like that, I think is really interesting and lets them go turn over stones. Like I like that kid from UTEP, the edge. I think he was productive last year and comes in and gives them a weapon as well. And, experimenting a little bit with guys from different places, like, hey, let's take a swing on a Michigan defensive lineman who hasn't panned out. Like maybe he's got, physical tools that can get us a rotation player. And what else? A Tennessee Tech kid. Like I think that they're kind of turning over stones in a way that they haven't before, and that's all related to the process of kind of modernizing the front office a little bit. Which is modernizing is a weird word to use with Mike Gundy, but I didn't even. This is terrible. I didn't even come up with a question with them and kind of my original like, hey, here's what I'm thinking about for the Big 12, just because it's exactly that. I don't know. And Mike Gundy is honestly at his best when you try to put him in a box. And so not knowing what box to put Gundy in for this season is very terrifying because I'm just not sure what to do with them. Are they going to start Haas Henchey at quarterback? I mean, look, Meach loves him. I get that. There's connection there. And like he recruited him. And I'm just worried about a guy who couldn't beat out Josh Hoover, right? Like that's a little worrisome, you know?
I don't know. I think it's between him and Zane Flores. And I go back and forth. If you ask me this question tomorrow, I'll have a different answer than I had today, and I'll have a different answer the day after that. Because there's the obvious connection between your OC and Hengy. But like if like Flores is gonna be the guy, it's like this feels like the time.
You just don't want a controversy. You just want somebody to win the job decisively.
You cannot do 2 years ago. You cannot go into, we're going to try out a bunch of different guys against UT Martin before we go to work. No. Day one starter, you pick a guy to start a fall camp, and that's the guy. Then he's got to be the guy because you have got to there's too much new and too much going on. You need some things settled day one, and quarterback needs to be one of them. Like you don't need to be like, all right, we've decided heading into game one against UT Martin who our starting quarterback is. Nope, too late. You've waited 2-3 weeks too late. Like it's got to be, we can't decide. Then spin a wheel and throw a dart and close your eyes and point, and that's the guy. Because at this point also, I don't trust Mike Gundy to make a quarterback decision to save his life because we have enough evidence throughout his entire 10 years the head coach at Oklahoma State that he is not good at picking the starting quarterback.
Yep. And it's hard. I mean, it's a hard problem and he likes most of his guys. Can I point out and just recuse myself? I was trying to refresh on 3 and it populated all the Baylor guys, but it said Oklahoma State at the top. None of the players I just listed are going to Oklahoma State. They're going to Baylor. The point still stands of Oklahoma State is modernizing their front office and, turning over some stones and taking a swing on this. But I was talking about Baylor's people because on 3 is still not loading for me. So, just clip that part where I talk confidently and correctly about who's coming to Oklahoma State and meeting the Baylor people.
I was like UTEP. I was like, I thought they had a wide receiver from there the year before that, but maybe no. Look, they brought in like the best wide receiver out of was it the Division II level? Terrell Davis from UCO. Like they've never had a problem, especially the last few years, of going and looking for guys where they have to find them. Because you're operating with you're not operating with a budget that everybody else has when it comes to NIL stuff, and so they try and get creative of where can we which fits Gundy anyways. You pull coordinators from all sorts of places. Like you're going to pull talent wherever you think you can find talent. You've got a running back from Georgia State. You've got a backup. You've got a wide receiver from Emory and Henry. Okay, y'all. Where's that? Like they'll pull guys from wherever if they think they fit the system. And so the other question for Oklahoma State to me is because there's too many questions to answer. Can you fix the offensive line? It has been such a freaking struggle for so long that they finally made a move at offensive line coach. You now have 2 offensive line coaches, which I'm like, awesome. That's great. 2 alums.
I feel like Oscar Martinez in The Office. Like, what about the 2 popes? What team doesn't have 2 quarterbacks? Yeah. No, the offensive line is, I mean, that needs to be, with the system that they're running, it doesn't have to be great. It just has to be not aggressively bad. And it's kind of descended into that. And you see some guys have transferred and played very productive roles elsewhere. And you think, it would have been nice for those guys to play very productive roles at Oklahoma State.
Wonder what happened here. Maybe you kept a guy around for too long because you prefer continuity for continuity's sake. Poor man's Dabo.
Maybe. I like Bob Schick out of Virginia Tech. If I remember correctly, he is older. I think he's a redshirt senior, and they had some injury issues. So he wasn't like a starter on their team, but he ended up playing a starter role and was moving at different places and kind of involved. So that kind of consistency, like versatility, I think is really, really good on an offensive line, as well as there's worse things to do than to bring in experienced guys on the offensive line and say like, hey, we just need level-headed, big dudes. And so, I think they're definitely trying to address it.
There's always those programs where you're like, I don't know what question to have because there's too many questions and I don't even know where to go with this. I don't know.
Yep. And I'll plug myself here, and I won't derail us because we're not going to get to all 16 questions here. But I talked to Stephen Godfrey on his podcast, Phantom Island, a couple of weeks ago about offensive lines, and talked about the trade-off between experience and continuity and all that, and kind of what the portal is doing to that. Go listen to that if you're interested in the unique plight of Oklahoma State. I don't think we actually mentioned Oklahoma State, but the principles there, I think, are really pertinent to their questions.
I did listen to it. It's fantastic. I like the whole offensive line's always been a really interesting position group to me because it's so underappreciated but so important. And the conversations around the transfer portal and the offensive line to me is so interesting. And it plays into the conversation of how many schools are starting to spend their NIL dollars on retention over recruitment from a transfer portal situation. And offensive line to me is always one of those things of you're trying to build an offensive line through the portal. Good luck. Have fun.
Yep, it's hard. It's an art. Yep.
I hope your quarterback is mobile and doesn't hold the ball for too long.
Exactly. If you have offensive line problems, just find a really good tight end and practice your quarterback throwing outside the pocket and moving around, and just be like, dude, we don't know what's going to happen up front, but if it goes to heck, just go find the tight end and keep the chains rolling.
Maybe that's why Oklahoma State's brought in 10 tight ends for this year. That would explain a lot. The other team that had the massive disappointing season that I want to look at is Utah. Look, you spent 2 years hoping beyond hope that your oft-injured quarterback would not get injured, and you kept a team built around him to have success. And for 2 straight years, the thing we all knew would happen happened, and he got injured, and it has derailed 2 seasons at Utah and set the entire program back. Now you have Kyle Whittingham, who's back for another year, which feels like it is his last year. I think last year would have been his last year had they not been so bad. He doesn't want to leave his good friend, defensive coordinator, soon to be head coach, in the lurch with a bad situation. I'm through the lens of he's trying to set things up for his successor to have success. How do you view this Utah team this year?
I actually am really interested in what Utah's doing because it does feel like they're doing an experiment, not unlike what Iowa's doing. Another team has been perennially, middle upper class on the back of an excellent defense. Bringing in Dampier, bringing in Beck, and saying, okay, last season we had 4 losses where we held opponents to 23 points or less. They had multiple losses where, I think about the TCU game, which is the one I watched the closest just because I was there. They connected on a ball, turned out to be holding, negated it. That would have won them the game. They had the ball multiple times with the opportunity to win. Their defense absolutely stifled TCU, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't pull it out. And so instead of saying, hey, the Gary Patterson, we just need to get 24 points in those games. They're saying, you know what? We just need explosives. Let's turn over every stone. Let's try something weird. And again, I said this about Dave Aranda. I'm shocked I'm saying it about Kyle Whittingham for his tenure, but the willingness to experiment here and say, dude, we've just got to figure out what we've been doing isn't working. We know we can put a good defense on the field. Let's see if we can, milk some explosives out of this and kind of change the game. Even if you're just moving the ball 15% better, they're 80s in opponent adjusted EPA per play on offense, in the 80s. They can push that to the 50s, Phillip. I think their defense goes from 30s to top 20 just because they're in better situations and not being asked to defend short fields from turnovers and all this nonsense as well. So the general equilibrium effects there, I think you talked about Baylor as a dark horse in kind of the same way I'm going to talk about Utah as a dark horse. What if it is just easy as awesome defense and then we make explosive plays on offense? That could take you a really, really long way, right?
Yeah. I mean, you're on the schedule part, the defense started to fall apart at the end of the last few games of the year because the defense had to do everything and it didn't matter. I mean, you held Arizona to 23 points and you lost by 13. You held Arizona State to 27. You lost by 8. You held TCU to 13. You lost by 6. You held Houston to 17. You lost by 3. You held BYU to 22 or 21 or 22 and you lost by 1. And the defense was everything we thought it would be, but because they kept trying to he's not going to get hurt this year, which I think was program malpractice to continue to be here. I get it, but dude's old and can't stay healthy? Why are you continuing to sit here and just be like, well, if we could just, it feels like you put the program was held hostage by a quarterback, even though he wasn't actually holding the program hostage. It was all those around him trying to like hold it for him. It's like someone who's holding the door for you, except that they're like 30 feet down the hall.
Yeah.
And you're never going to get there.
I mean, we got some legitimately awesome Cam Rising moments. Like, I think the promise and the potential of him was certainly great and was in line with that. What if we just get some explosive plays? But one, the offensive line, like, it sounds crazy because it's going to have 2 NFL draft picks, maybe first round guys this year, which should help with Dampier a little bit. But he just couldn't make the style of play work, and really was struggling a little bit to kind of pull it all together. And then you add the injuries on top of that, and the fact that, like, because you had him, you weren't able to get a pipeline going necessarily because he was going to be the starter. And so your backup options weren't necessarily great. I'm really interested in that. I think the question for Utah, that kind of the secondary question there is not, can they get the explosives? It's actually more nuanced. Like, with an excellent offensive line, does Dampier know how to create out of chaos? Like, can he play in structure? If he's not getting pressured and doesn't have to extend plays and has to hit timing routes, does he become a worse version of himself? I think that's another thing I'm watching for Utah here, just because the offensive line should be excellent for Utah. And he should have a lot of room to work, which, great. He can throw the ball downfield. He can run around and make plays. He can bail and beat you with his legs. But if there's not chaos, is he going to be able to hit the timing routes? Is he going to have the accuracy there? I think those are questions that we have about him that are hard to know with the transfer up a level, and we'll just see on the field this fall.
Utah's a dark horse. I'm keeping that note. I trust smart people. Let's go to, we'll get through a couple more here, and then maybe we can.
Let's rapid fire a couple, because I have an out.
Okay.
Because we spent 15 minutes catching up on our lives instead of doing the podcast at the beginning.
What? That never happened. All right, let's hit a few quick. Colorado. There's no way you're replicating last season.
Yeah, let's take the name out of it. Let's just leave everything aside.
Perfect. That's
right?
perfect. That's perfect.
This is a Big 12 team who struggled on defense, who is replacing a player who was traded up for in the first round, and one of the better quarterbacks that they've seen in college football in a while. I'm not optimistic about replacing that. I think Caden Salter was clearly frustrated at Liberty last year, and the drop issue wasn't going away, and I think he's a fun athlete. But they've also got the freshman kid Juju Watkins, I believe, coming in, and Lewis, what's his name? Watkins, whatever. He's coming in. There might be a legitimate battle. I don't know that Caden Salter is necessarily going to take the first snap, although I think he should. But yeah, it has to be a rebuilding year. And so the issue there is we're setting Colorado's floor here. I think they're going to replace three guys. Jimmy Horn is a great football player, almost completely unheralded, had some really excellent games, filled a really, really nice lead when Hunter, and the few times Hunter couldn't get open. So that's hard. They're still building. And the hope is that, you're climbing vertically, even as you're dropping, you're still moving up over time. But this looks to be a down year.
Iowa State, you lose, we teased them earlier. You lose 2 NFL wide receivers and a ton on that defense.
They're optimistic about the 2 transfer guys. I like Rocco. It's going to be hard. Be hard.
Good. Look, they replace guys on defense all the time pretty well. Like, let's be honest. So it wouldn't shock me if they replaced most of them, but there's a lot of losses, and they're not a wide receiver factory. And so to have 2 NFL wide receivers, that's not something
both of those guys started out very rough. Higgins came in, but Noel started out very rough, and they kind of had to figure out how to use him. So there is the potential that they've learned some lessons about how to deploy these guys and kind of learn what they're good at. But that was an adjustment process. That might be best case scenario for them. I think better over the course of the season, right? And by the end, they're really humming, and they don't fall so far in the beginning. They don't get off to a rocky start there as well. I think managing expectations at Iowa State is something that they haven't done a great job with. They've had a ton of returning production and been bad. And, I think they need to shut out all the noise and just focus on their identity and kind of what they can do. And very similar. We're sensing a profile in the Big 12, good defense. And can we keep the explosives up on offense?
Everyone's favorite dark horse for this year, Texas Tech. You bring back a lot. You bring in a lot of transfers to up the quality of talent. So the idea is that we add more talent to the top and push everything else down. Look, I still have some Baron Morton stock. It's always Morton time in Lubbock. Is he enough to get them to Arlington?
Can he stay healthy for the entire season? And I don't mean that to be a meme or a knock on him. That's something that Texas Tech has struggled with. They've struggled with continuity at the quarterback position. Texas Tech brought in 12 blue chip recruits in the portal this year. The rest of the Big 12 combined brought in 12. They have the talent they are spending. They need to win the conference this year. I think they have the roster side of it done. Losing Kitley is interesting. Not that he was bad. I think he's a great coordinator, but I think he was committed to best 11 on the field to a fault, where their offense kind of became an island of misfit toys at points. So can they figure out how to have more of an offensive identity? Losing Taj Brooks, again, you're changing the gravity of your offense. You don't have that get out of short yardage free card anymore. That's going to be hard. They're going to have to adapt around that. They do bring in a couple tackles that should shore up the run game, and interior offensive linemen who should start. And then a couple weapons outside at the blue chip level. So like, they're going to have talent on the field. They're kind of the ones where we're talking about coaching matters a whole ton. The coaches have all the talent you could want. Can they stay healthy through the season? Can they deploy those guys well? If there ever was going to be a year for Texas Tech, this would be it.
All right. Last one. West Virginia. Rich Rod's back, but the players that made Rich Rod are not. So should be fun.
I think the upside for West Virginia, lowest over under in the Big 12 right now, is one, the pace difference. Like, no one in the Big 12 plays like this. Like, watching Jacksonville State film last year was like drinking from a fire hose. I mean, they are just getting up and going and going and going. That's going to be very annoying. That's how you mitigate a team like Utah, for instance, who's going to try to get, 1-7, 1-8 big plays and then try to clamp you on defense, saying, hey, we're actually going to control possession and run a ton of plays and wear your defense down and then hope to break it open at the end of the game. Will that translate? I don't necessarily know. Will it be very fun to watch? I certainly hope so. I think their upshot is, can we be annoying enough to defenses to give us some leeway to get that, like, a ceiling for West Virginia? Like 8 wins would be an amazing season for year one for Rich Rod, I think.
I feel like a bowl win for
a bowl would be huge. I mean, just for the donors and like feeling like the good old days. I mean, yeah, that would be amazing.
I mean, him having enough success to get into a bowl game in year one is a proof of concept that you sell, and I think that's huge for them. Like, I think that would be the amount of just West Virginia noise would be incredible for them if you got them to a bowl game and they were in a bowl game and they had a fun opponent and they won that game. I think if that's the goal, that is a huge success for West Virginia, and they're going to be a talk of a town in the Big 12 all next offseason.
Absolutely. And that was it. As like, the vibes are bad with Neil. It's not necessarily that he did a super bad job, but like, West Virginia doesn't want to be that kind of program, and the vibes got bad, and Rich Rod definitely raises the vibes and plays a fun style of offense that is going to be something that teams have to prep for every week. That gives you an advantage.
Yep. All right, we'll wrap here. I'll try and make note of which teams we didn't talk about, and we'll try and get you back on to finish. Let's call it part 2 later this summer. But Parker, as always, man, it's so fun. It's so fun to chat with you. It really is. You do a great job. The haters can hate. I don't care. Parker, for everything people want to get from you from a college sports standpoint, where can they find it all?
StatsOWar is kind of the vehicle on Twitter. I've been trying to post on Blue Sky and LinkedIn, but who cares? I think Twitter is kind of the vehicle there. You can find me and what I'm going to do this fall and everything there.
Do not besmirch Blue Sky, okay? They're doing that. People just need to buy in. LinkedIn. Yeah, no, I'm not going to LinkedIn for college.
LinkedIn's the worst. Appreciate talking with you. Always good to talk ball, and absolutely we'll come back on and State of Union things as we get closer to the season.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network. We interrupt
interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip. When it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.